Hi everyone! I swear this is the last video on pick-me vegans that I'll be making in a while because I'm a little burnt out on this topic. But one of my subs sent me this video by Queer Kiwi called Pick-me Vegans and That Vegan Teacher. And I had to respond because her definition of a pick-me vegan is very confusing.
And I just want to talk about not veganism, vegans and vegan activism and what I like to call pick-me vegans. So to preface this, I myself have been vegan for coming up 5 years, and I was a vegetarian for 7 years before that. So I haven't eaten meat for a majority of my life. I stopped eating meat when I was 10 and I am now almost 22. And so this is something that I have a lot of experience in. I've been in a lot of vegan spaces. A lot of my friends are vegan, Kat's vegan, so I live in a vegan household. Before I moved to the UK, I lived in a vegan household because my mom and my sister both went vegan shortly after I did. So this is something that I have a lot of, thoughts about, a lot of morals. It's something I care a lot about. And there's a lot of vegans out there who give us a bad name. They give us a bad rep. And it's a real problem because, the vegans that come to mind when you think about veganism now is, mostly people like That Vegan Teacher, right? And it means that a lot of people have a lot of, anger and spite toward vegans, where it becomes well, you can't tell me what to do. I'm gonna go eat a steak. I'm gonna go, and it puts people off. It makes people angry and defensive, and it makes people hate vegans. And it's so frustrating. And it's this thing, right, where they know that that's what they're doing. They can see their comments, they see what's going on, and they see so many people, bully them. That vegan teacher always talks about vegan phobia and how it's a form of oppression. We will get into that shortly. And we see those reactions, and yet they continue to do it because they get validation from other vegans. And it's so... There's so much ego boosting within the vegan community and within vegan activists and vegan activism. There's a lot of things that a lot of vegans talk about of comparing animal cruelty to human rights issues. And there's a lot of putting animals on the same level as humans and talking about speciesism. There's a lot of just angry thoughts. I, as someone who has been vegan for such a long time, understand where they're coming from. I don't disagree with where the points are coming from. I understand and I empathize and I don't disagree, but I do completely disagree with the way that they go about it. The way that it's very guilt trippy, it's very shame-y, it's very all or nothing. And it's very you get approval from other vegans being yeah, you're right, keep doing this, speak your truth, we need to say it. While non-vegans, the people you're trying to get through to are no, I hate you, stop doing this, and on the defense. And you see that that's the reaction. Praise from vegans, hate from non-vegans. And you would think that that would click in your brain to stop and change. You're not trying to impress vegans. You're trying to get through to non-vegans to become vegans. So by pissing them off, you're not really helping. By making vegans happy, what are you doing? They're already vegan. It doesn't make a fucking difference, does it?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. First, Queer Kiwi defines a pick-me vegan as a vegan who seeks validation from other vegans. This is completely backwards because a pick-me girl is a girl who seeks validation from men by putting down other women. She's not like other girls. She's a cool girl who will laugh at your sexist jokes rather than call you out on them. Following this theme, a pick-me vegan is a vegan who seeks validation from non-vegans by putting down other vegans. They differentiate themselves from those other vegans who make people uncomfortable with all this talk about speciesism. If we accept Queer Kiwi's definition here, then the parallel would be a pick-me girl is a woman who seeks validation from other feminists. And that is not what a pick-me girl is understood to be. Ironically, Queer Kiwi is a bit of a pick-me vegan herself. Second, there is some truth to the idea that we should seek to be calm, rational, and disarming, rather than angry and aggressive. But no matter how calmly and rationally you deliver the message, some people will perceive your passion as aggression because the message itself is one that they don't want to hear. To avoid being perceived as aggressive, militant, judgmental, and self-righteous, you have to water down the message to the point where it's no longer about animal rights. In other words, you have to abandon the actual message. If you're accused of being any of these negative stereotypes I just listed, then yeah, you should reflect on your approach. If you could have worded something in a way that was less inflammatory without sacrificing the integrity of your message, try that next time. But if upon reflection you don't know how you could have possibly conveyed the message in a less inflammatory way, just accept that this reaction comes with the territory of sharing an unpopular belief. Don't let non-vegans gaslight you into thinking that you're being an aggressive asshole when you're merely advocating for animal rights. I say all of this as a general rule, but I recognize that there are contexts in which being intentionally inflammatory and provocative is useful because it draws attention to the cause. This is why I don't criticize DXE activists who march into grocery stores and restaurants chanting, "It's not food, it's violence." Their strategy is to bring attention to the issue, not to turn people vegan on the spot. Social justice activists are often referred to as agitators. And looking back at feminists and civil rights activists of the past, this term has a positive connotation. During their time, though, they were not viewed positively by the public. There's another angle to effective communication that pick-me vegans don't consider, and that is the effectiveness of being honest and direct, not talking out of both sides of your mouth or beating around the bush. As I mentioned in my video on pick-me vegans, I work in sales. I talk to hundreds of people a day. The vast majority of these people are not interested in a free solar consultation. But that doesn't mean my approach is not effective. Your girl is very good at sales. At a given time, not everyone is interested in what you're selling. Most people don't want to listen to your sales pitch. Some people will get pissed at you for daring to approach them. You just have to accept this reality and move on to the next person who might be interested. In a sense, we're trying to sell people on the idea that animals deserve rights. Just because the majority of people are not immediately impacted by a vegan activist message doesn't mean their approach is not effective. I'm just so tired of vegans making the unsubstantiated claim that taking a strong stance for animal rights doesn't work because it pisses people off. If you've watched my previous videos, I sound like a broken record, but they are failing to account for the sleeper effect. Research on persuasion shows that there is often a delayed response known as the sleeper effect. This effect has been observed in various situations, including the delayed acceptance of an ego-attacking message and the delayed impact of minority influence. A message is initially discounted, but it essentially goes to sleep in the back of our minds. It has the potential to be awakened and reconsidered when the person is confronted with information from another source that challenges whatever justification they use to discount it. In other words, the fact that a message stirs up feelings of anger and shame and doesn't prompt immediate behavior change doesn't mean that the message was not persuasive. Third, I don't think that vegans receiving praise from other vegans or having a largely vegan audience is an indication that what they're doing is useless because they're preaching to the choir. I've heard this criticism aimed at activists like Joey Carbstrong and Earthling Ed. I think this undervalues the importance of community and social validation when it comes to staying vegan. One of the main reasons people revert back to eating animals is that they didn't have social support. Helping people stay vegan and inspiring them to become activists is just as important as helping people go vegan. And fourth, I'd like to push back on the idea that aggressive vegans, such as that vegan teacher, are seeking validation from other vegans. They may receive some praise from vegans, but what I see a whole lot more of is criticism from other vegans, like Queer Kiwi. I'm not saying the criticism is entirely unwarranted. Some of the stuff Katie says is pretty yikesy. Telling people that coming out as gay or trans is a selfish act. Yikes. Trying to reclaim the N-word as a white woman. Yikes. Here's a clip that Queer Kiwi includes in her video.
To donate your organs, to help somebody, to give them sight, to give them a new lease on life. I used to sign it all the time. And as a nurse for 25 years, I used to tell everyone, yeah, of course you should sign your card. Why wouldn't you? We need a great society that cares for one another. But then I became vegan and I realized that the vast majority of you are evil. Evil people. And I don't especially care if you keep living.
Big fucking yikes. But a lot of the pushback she gets is on stuff that is totally defensible. For example,
now, we all know some of the classic things that vegan teacher says, right? So she has this video called All Women Should Be Vegan. And this is probably one of the most classic style of not just that vegan teacher videos, but of just vegan activism in general, of comparing animal welfare to human rights issues. So this one is All Women Should Be Vegan. And it is a classic trope of if you're a woman and you say you're a feminist, you cannot contribute to the dairy industry because that is contributing to the forceful insemination of female cows. It is contributing to forceful, like, separation of mother and child, and it's doing all these things against their consent, and they are bred on a thing called a rape rack, which is its actual name, by the way. It is called a rape rack, which is fucking horrifying. And I agree, in the terms of what happens in the dairy industry is absolutely appalling. It's disgusting. The dairy industry is the absolute worst industry. It's worse than any other agricultural industry, in my opinion. It's absolutely the worst. The way that cattle are treated is fucking disgusting. And a lot of people don't know how bad the dairy industry is. And I think that it is important to talk about and to educate people on the dairy industry and the meat industry and what happens, because it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. And I didn't know for a long time. I was a vegetarian. I consumed dairy, and I didn't know. But anyway, the problem comes in when you compare that to human issues. And now I know that if she watches this, which she might, she's gonna call me speciesist. A lot of vegans do. When you bring this up and you say don't compare animal issues to human issues, you get called speciesist. Now, here is where the problem lies. I personally view animals and humans both as animals. That's what we are. I don't separate us as much as a lot of people do. I have always sort of just seen it as life, right? That's why I went vegetarian at such a young age. As soon as I was able to comprehend that I was eating an animal, I did not want to do that because that's not fair, that's awful. And I felt awful, so I didn't want to do that anymore. And I've always viewed it like that. I've always put us sort of on a similar level. But what you have to understand is that most people don't do that. We are brought up in a society where we do view animals differently. We do put like cats and dogs and pets on one level, and then we put farm animals and like cattle on a different level, and then obviously humans are at the top. And that's what we're taught, that's how we're raised. And there are obvious differences. We've developed empathy and like functionality and things. You have to understand that there are differences, and people do view those differences, and people are comprehending those differences based on the society that we live in and based on the information that we have and how we treat animals and blah, blah, blah. So by pushing that narrative and comparing it to human issues, you are not helping the cause, because that is you diminishing human rights issues, and that is you almost prioritizing animals over humans, which is speciesist in itself. Personally, I despise humans. I'm not a big fan of humans either. But human rights issues and equality are very, very important. Those are two very different things. My distaste for the humans as a species is very different to my distaste for, like, humans in general. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like humanity, but humans are equal. You know what I mean, I think. But this is flaw number one with vegan activism, is that comparing it to human issues and pushing the narrative like that is not the way to go about it. That puts people off, that makes people angry. Surely you would have learned that by now. You can teach people about the horrors of the dairy industry without comparing it to human rights. That is lacking a whole lot of empathy, because we aren't cows, you know? And like implying that we are is like offensive, especially like women. Just don't do that. It's not helpful. Talk about the dairy industry without comparing women to cows. Just a thought. Please do that.
So let's get into why this is a defensible position, and why vegans should be defending this position rather than condemning people like that vegan teacher for expressing it. As Queer Kiwi acknowledges, humans are animals. This is a biological fact. I acknowledge that women are not cows, with the exception of Doja Cat.
Bitch, I'm a cow. Bitch, I'm a cow.
We have 2 legs. They have 4. We have 1 stomach. They have 4. We say hello. They say moo. I could go on, but none of these differences are relevant when it comes to the basic right to not be exploited. Sentience, the capacity to feel pleasure and pain, is what matters here. Like women, cows have a brain and central nervous system. They have a maternal bond with their young and experience distress and grief when their babies are stolen from them. Like women, they have to become pregnant to produce milk, and they can develop a painful infection called mastitis from being milked. It is wrong to exploit and kill cows for the same reason it's wrong to exploit and kill women. We are sentient beings who desire freedom from harm. She says she understands the point being made, but she demonstrates that she does not understand when she says that making such comparisons diminishes human rights issues and prioritizes animals over humans. The only thing being diminished is humans' superior status over animals that allows us to use and abuse them. And the only thing being prioritized is animals' lives over humans' frivolous desires. Granting animals basic rights does not take away women's rights or LGBT rights. Women should have the right to vote and gay people should have the right to marry, but no one should have the right to violate the rights of others. Comparison is not only a useful tool in persuasion, it's fundamental to understanding concepts. According to these random university English course notes I found when I googled the importance of comparison, comparative thinking is one of our first and most natural forms of thought. Without the ability to make comparisons, to set one object or idea against another, and take note of similarities and differences, much of what we call learning would quite literally be impossible. Drawing comparisons between humans and animals is how we come to understand the concept of animal rights. Animal rights were derived from the concept of human rights. You can't really talk about animal rights without talking about humans or human rights. I mean, theoretically you can, but practically it's very difficult to make a compelling case for animal rights without relating to human rights issues people care about. For some people, seeing slaughterhouse footage is enough to turn them vegan. But for many people, the argument for animal rights needs to be spelled out, and comparisons are what help a lot of people, like myself, understand the severity of the issue. Avoiding such comparisons would be a massive hindrance to our movement. Take Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation, which was revolutionary to the modern animal rights movement. Now remove any mention of humans and human rights. You just removed the core argument of the book, the argument for marginal cases. I have an entire video on problematic comparisons that I encourage you to watch if you're offended by vegans comparing animal oppression to human oppression. It's common for pick-me vegans to prioritize protecting the feelings of non-vegans over sharing the truth. Just because someone's offended doesn't mean they're right. Conservatives are offended when you say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. Racists are offended when you point out their racism. TERFs are offended by trans women.
How dare you compare trans women to women? I'm offended.
But trans women are women?
Trans women are obviously different. They were born male.
Sure, there are differences between trans women and cis women, but trans women are still women.
Okay, maybe you're right. Like, I understand your point, but you're not going to convince people that trans women are women by comparing trans women to women. It's offensive.
Saying we shouldn't compare the oppression of women to the oppression of dairy cows because it's offensive to women is pandering to the sensitivities of the oppressor, which is an absurd thing to do.
There is a massive mindset from vegans that is very all or nothing. It's either you are 100% vegan 100% of the time, or it's not enough. I was blocked on Twitter by this vegan a couple years back now because he was saying like, only being vegan once a week is the same as only kicking a puppy once a week. And I'm like, listen, my guy, I understand where you're coming from. I really do. I get it. But if you think about it logically, that technically is still better than kicking a puppy every day. But also, if you think about it, don't look at it on an individual scale. That's the problem. You can't look at things on an individual scale because individually we don't make that big of a difference, right? It's looking at it as like a larger overall big picture of, I like to think of it as if 100% of the world was vegan 50% of the time, that is the same as 50% of the world being 100% vegan. So it's the same result. Having everyone make more vegan choices is making a difference. And that's where people don't think about it and don't recognize. So like having a plant-based Monday, like meatless Monday, it may seem like very little on an individual level, but if you think about that like on a global scale, that's a really big impact. You need to encourage small steps and making more vegan choices, because anything is something. And you can't get mad at people for taking those steps. You have to encourage them and congratulate them and say that what they're doing is making a difference and that it's really good, and introduce them to more vegan food. If you go out with people and you take them to vegan restaurants, or you suggest vegan items, and just make more vegan choices, and you're making a difference. And that is something that I really strongly believe. And also, I think a lot of people forget, like, when I went vegan, it didn't have a huge impact, where someone who is a big carnivore animal product consumer just cuts out 1 day a week. They're making way more impact than when I went vegan. Before I went vegan, my diet was like 85-90% vegan. I barely consumed any animal products at all. Without even trying. That's just what my diet became. The longer I was vegetarian, the more vegan my diet became. And so me going vegan did not make a huge difference. I did not cut out very much. I wasn't contributing very much in the first place. Whereas if someone was a massive carnivore and ate meat and dairy like 2 out of 3 meals a day, if they go vegan 2 days a week, they're making more of an impact than I ever did cutting out anything from my diet. And so I think that has to be taken into consideration as well. Like, if my dad went vegan once a week, that would make a huge difference compared to my going vegan permanently. It's a case-by-case situation. And we need to encourage anything and everything.
I've talked about why I think vegans should advocate for veganism rather than reducitarianism in a million other videos, but in short, I agree that something is better than nothing and that less harm is better than more harm. But we don't use this type of rhetoric when we're talking about human rights. So why are we so sure that this is the most effective approach to animal rights advocacy? This argument comes down to what is most effective. In other words, which approach helps us achieve a vegan world faster? She says that if 100% of the world was 50% vegan, this is the same as 50% of the world being 100% vegan. These two scenarios are not the same. Maybe for a precise moment in time, but we have to consider which scenario leads to a vegan world faster. If 100% of the world was 50% vegan, no one would actually be vegan. Nobody would be advocating for animal rights. Yet if 50% of the world was 100% vegan, vegans would have significant social and political power. In political science, there's a concept known as the tipping point for social change. Only 25% of a population has to take a committed stance for large-scale social change to occur. Reaching that tipping point is a long, arduous process, but once it is reached, change occurs rapidly due to the snowball effect. She claims that a carnivore who eats plant-based 2 days a week is making a bigger impact than she is, because before she was vegan, she was predominantly plant-based. This is extremely confusing, but for one, it assumes that the impact of vegans lies only in their boycott of animal products, which is simply not true. Vegans have a huge social impact. The hypothetical carnivore who eats plant-based 2 days a week does not have the same attitude about animals that a vegan does. They're not out here advocating for social change regarding how we view animals. The way she's praising this hypothetical carnivore reminds me of capitalists simping for billionaire philanthropists. Like, you may be advocating for systemic change to liberate people from economic oppression, but Bill Gates is doing so much more than you could ever do with all the money he's giving to charity. How dare you criticize him? Like, sure, we should recognize the good that billionaires are doing, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about the harm they're causing. Also, over the course of their lifetimes, Queer Kiwi is contributing much less to the meat industry than this fictitious meat lover who eats plant-based 2 days a week. So they're not actually making a bigger impact than her. Let's say a pedophile decides to molest a child once a year instead of once a month. Are they making a bigger impact than someone who's never molested a child? This is giving me flashbacks to Unnatural Vegan's bizarre conclusion that the children of environmentalists have negative carbon emissions.
And the way that people go about this is so twisted and so wrong and so shameful and angry, and it's so frustrating. Your vegan activism shouldn't exist to get validation from other vegans. Your vegan activism should exist for the animals and to help animals. And if your activism is harming animals, you are not helping. And Katie and so many other popular vegan activists, your veganism is harming more than it is helping. If you are encouraging, like, thousands of people to continue to eat meat just to spite you, that is hurting the cause. Don't be so aggressive. I know that it's upsetting. I know that it's angry. I've cried about it many times. It makes me deeply, deeply upset, and it's so awful. And I hate it. But you can't be angry towards other people outwardly because it's not effective. Again, I'm not speaking specifically directly to her. This is all stuff that is common within vegan activism.
I'm not saying that vegan teacher doesn't deserve criticism for some of the wacky shit she said, but can we stick to criticizing her for this shit instead of making apt comparisons? And in general, can we stop lumping obnoxious behavior like using slurs, body shaming, and actual racism and sexism in with simply advocating for animal rights in an honest and direct way? Passion is often perceived as aggression by those who are not ready to hear the message, and I refuse to tone down my passion. Don't be gaslit into toning down your passion and weakening your message because there are people out there who are ready to listen and need honest and direct communication for it to really click. Thank you so much for watching. I know I said I'm done with this topic for a while, but I did have a conversation with vegan gays last week reacting to some pick-me vegan nonsense that I'll get around to editing eventually, so stay tuned for that. But apart from that, I'm moving on to other topics. Alright, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them